Good morning. In case you don't know me, my name is Sherry. I am married to Chris, who's waving. I found Rooted through Chase and Kiana. Chase invited Chris to a men's group. Chris went, wouldn't stop talking about it, and dragged me to a Sunday morning. And we've been here ever since. And we've also do Rodney and Carla's life group. We started the life group before we started coming on Sundays. So today's verse is Mark 21 through 34, and I'm out of the NIV. When Jesus had crossed again over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I touched his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, and told him the whole truth. He said, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from suffering."
Awesome. Thank you, Sherry. Okay. I've told a couple stories up here about my dad. Today I wanted to tell one about my mom and her dad. I grew up, my family is pretty musical, and I think most of it starts with my grandpa. And then my mom, they both were worship leaders and did a lot of stuff. But I remember getting really cool access because of what they did to some pretty sweet places. My grandpa used to work at a church in California. It was called Three Crosses now. It was neighborhood back then, and they were a big church, and part of the reason was some of you guys are from Overlake, so I've heard about the choir. That was them. They did this huge Easter and Christmas production, and this was back when my grandpa would write the entire score by hand. He would write it out. I mean, he created the stuff. It was crazy. And so they were basically the school of the arts as part of this church. But the sweetest thing about being like 5 and 6 at my grandpa's church was the orchestra pit. If you've never gotten to go in an orchestra pit, it's awesome when nobody's there and you just have one little light on in the sanctuary, and we'd go on and it's just the floor of the stage, but it's a lift. And so it'd give me the button, and I got to push the button, and half the stage would just start sinking. It's so cool. And you go down, and then there's all the tubas and the xylophone and the harp and timpani drums and everything stored under stage. So being like 6 and getting to see that was awesome. My mom, same thing. She was a jazz singer for the biggest jazz band in the West Coast, the Emerald City Jazz Kings, and did some musicals and all that kind of stuff. So same thing. After the show, getting to go backstage and seeing Chris Rodabaugh, you can have the Wi-Fi. There we go. You didn't know it does that. It's just this. It's fun. If I'm friends with you and you try to get on the Wi-Fi, it asks me. And so getting to see like stage sets and meet the stars of the people who just sang, and these guys with 57 years of experience, and they'd show me their clarinet. This one guy, he was the director, and he was the clarinet player, and I thought that was really random and cool. So all that kind of stuff. Just because, right, I could say, that's my mom. That's my grandpa, right? At that level, nobody really gets to tell you no, or they would come and say, "He's with me." And so we get access. And that's a cool familial thing. And I know there's exceptions, but unless there's a relationship break, you get access to whatever it is that your parents have access to. That's part of the deal. And so if it's available to them, It's available to you. And so we get here this story in Mark chapter 5 about two daughters, and specifically what they get access to because of Jesus. So let's dive back in verse 21 of Mark chapter 5. If you remember last week and last time, we were actually not in Israel, and now we're back. So verse 21, when Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake. So now we're back in Israel. And a large crowd gathered around him, and one of the synagogue leaders, so again, very Jewish, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying." And that's not, a throwaway phrase. My little daughter is dying. There's a little bit of redundancy there. He didn't just say daughter. This would have been like a nickname, especially in the ancient language. You'd be like, whatever you call your kids. Sometimes I call mine small fry. Whatever it is, that's what's going on here, and it really helps set the stage that this is a personal story. This is a close story. And what I love about this, we spent a lot of time and a little bit of pain last week looking at the God who says no. Today is about the God who says yes. And so verse 24, so Jesus went with him. So Jesus is going to say yes. And let me show this because this is a big chunk. We are going to go all the way through the rest of the chapter. We will go through verse 43. But this is, I think, the fourth one. This is the sandwichiest of sandwiches so far in Mark. So much so that this was a literal story that got interrupted. I actually kind of think this is what gave Mark the inspiration to write the Gospel of Mark and the narratives in the form of sandwiches, because he got to watch one unfold. We're going to start with Jairus, and then he's interrupted. But it's not actually just a narrative thing that Mark does. This actually happens. Then there's another woman in between, and then we come back to Jairus. And the word faith and believe is going to come out in both of these. And so we get the story of this woman who comes on the way to Jairus' house and kind of interrupts the deal. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And this is verse 25. A woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. This is a very detailed expansion by Mark, right? And we've seen already, this is the fast gospel. Lots of getting the story down and then getting straight to Jesus' words. And there's a lot of detail here. Bleeding for 12 years, suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors, spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. So a lot of attention, a lot of detail, tons, and this is to help us get the picture, tons of suffering, tons of disappointing doctor visits, tons of money gone. And then verse 27, I think, is the beginning of Mark actually trying to make a point here. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. Because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. So here are the three things that she does, and this is pretty cool representation of faith according to Mark in his Gospels. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him and touched his cloak. She heard about Jesus. She came towards Jesus to touch Jesus. That's a good depiction of how faith works in the life of a disciple by Mark. She thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Verse 29, immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Now, already this is interesting because her healing is immediate, but the start of the story, it wasn't. We started actually with Jairus. He hasn't had his problem resolved yet, and she gets hers immediately. And that's just simply to say that this is the way that Jesus works. Some things are immediate and some things are not. In verse 30, at once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" And in 31, the disciples don't understand. And this happens, unfortunately, a lot to them. I think, unfortunately, it happens a lot to us as well. Jesus has something to say, and sometimes it's hard to understand. Who touched my clothes? And so the disciples, you see the people crowding against you. His disciples answered, and yet you can ask, who touched me? It's also entertaining how the disciples never really just say, huh? They always kind of tell Jesus he's being dumb, which is a weird thing to do, but they are nothing if not consistent. Jesus, how do you say that? There's people everywhere. And so 32 to 34, and here we go. But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." So we sped through that first part to get here. Because this is really the pinnacle of her story. Kind of the pivotal moment of her life. And the way that Jesus navigates this is impressive, and it's important, I think. First thing we see, Jesus asked his question, but then do you see what he does? He matched her desire to find him with his own desire to find her. I mean, we'll look at this more in a second. She risked a good deal to try to find him. Get through a crowd, get to the point where, if you can imagine, just getting within arm's length to reach out and touch. And so he matched her desire to find him with his own desire to see her. And so she came with fear and trembling and told him the whole truth. That's the end of 33 right there. She told him, even despite fear and trembling, the whole story. Jesus knows your whole story, but it's also true that Jesus wants to know your whole story. And he is willing and ready to listen to your whole story. And what's cool is your story is not a matter of shame to Jesus. It was to her and everyone else, her story was a matter of shame. And that's why this whole thing is so important, because we can just read, she's suffering for 12 years. Okay, that's a long time. I get it. We've been to the doctor. Yeah, I get that too. But to be bleeding for 12 years had an added stipulation in her world, which was shameful. Or at best, it was unclean. In fact, actually, everybody else was technically doing the right thing to avoid her. Because to be bleeding constantly for that long would put her under a religious stipulation that was meant to exist in a short duration on a women's menstrual cycle for always. And so she was considered unclean to touch, unclean to enter the temple, unclean to live in a normal neighborhood and be a normal neighbor. Everything about her story would have actually caused people to draw away. And so there's a beauty of getting to come near and tell Jesus the whole story. And to not be shamed. And in fact, what's extra cool, the fact that her touch healed her because of what her touch would have done to anyone else. See, while she was currently bleeding, if she came in contact with somebody, they would take on the same ritual uncleanliness as her, which is not like a death sentence or anything. This wasn't leprosy. Like, I don't think they believed it was contagious. I can't totally verify that, but it doesn't seem like they thought this was contagious. What it did, though, was it meant that you now had to go through ritual purification to come back to normal life, which was not accessible to her. But it would be an extreme inconvenience for her to just grab somebody else because now they can't go to church. They got to go home and do the whole special bath with the weird salts and all these things and at least till sunset, then re-enter. And that didn't happen to Jesus. In fact, the opposite. When she touched Jesus, her shame did not wear off on him, but he healed her in that moment of everything. Her story did nothing to diminish the glory and the power of Jesus. It didn't make him unclean. It didn't make him walk away. It didn't make him have to jump through any hoops. In fact, in bringing her story to Jesus, she was made clean by him. In fact, I would argue that because of this and other passages, you and I cannot come to Jesus without our whole story. I think people try sometimes. I want to come to Jesus with just the safe stuff. Let me just come to Jesus with not swearing. Let me just come to Jesus with going to church 2 to 3 times a month. But that's not your whole story. And I think part of what Jesus is doing, and he does a really good job with all of these slow conversations, is we don't get to come to Jesus without the whole story. He needs all of it. We bring not just the pleasant stuff in our attempt to get to Jesus, because that's not what needs saving. It's the stuff we'd rather hide from Jesus, the stuff that we think would cause other people to view us unclean or to run away. That's what needs saving. And that's where Jesus steps in. Now, why would she do this? I think it was part of the package of the whole thing. She felt physical healing, but more than that, she felt spiritual healing. And there was an incredible freedom in being known. The good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly, the whole story, Jesus gets it. Because that's what the conviction of the Spirit, that's what regeneration does in each of us as well. That man, it's this unfortunate irony brought on by the enemy to make us think that we have to shield ourselves from others. That's what brings us safety and freedom, when in reality, it's the exact opposite. There is so much freedom in being known and being loved and being accepted. And Jesus offers that in a way that nobody else does. But it's not to say that nobody else can also view her as clean and accept her. Because if Jesus has your whole story, you can have community. If Jesus knows everything about you, you can have true and genuine community. And that's what he does for her. That was the purpose of that question. Because I think, like the disciples, it's worth asking why Jesus asked in front of everybody, "Who touched my clothes?" He didn't need to do more healing. We already got the sentence before. She was already healed. She touched his robe. She was healed. She probably wanted out. I did the thing, and I'm going to go. But Jesus stopped. Jesus said, "Who touched my clothes?" Jesus made everybody take notice so that he could say in front of everyone, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Because now everybody knows Jesus has claimed her as clean. Jesus has made her well. Jesus has healed her. Everybody else doesn't have to take her at her word. They don't have to go, "I don't know, maybe you're just trying to, pull one over on us." Who cares what everybody else thinks? Jesus said it. And even more than that, this little word that Jesus gets to declare in front of probably hundreds of people, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." Daughter. Jesus himself does not do this very much. We see things like sons and daughters in other parts of Scripture, and we're going to go there, but that actually is unique to this story, that Jesus takes someone and calls her daughter. You are mine. So what this helps set us up for, in just one word, but it is a beautiful thing to consider. This is the doctrine of adoption. We don't do a lot of doctrine talk here, but all that means is a teaching, a biblical teaching, an essential teaching. And there's a whole vein of this throughout our Bible. It is so important, and Jesus does it right here, that if you are a Christian, something that is true about you is you have been adopted into the family of Christ. One way that comes to us is here in Romans 8. For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption. And this is important to sonship. I am glad that even in the climate we live in, and there have been some translation battles over gender in our Bibles, and the way that at times people are just translated man and mankind. This is sonship on purpose, because the firstborn son gets the inheritance. And so do you. You get access because your dad is Jesus. And by him we cry, "Abba, Father." The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. I love the doctrine of adoption. Specifically for this, whatever you were before Jesus is irrelevant. It does not matter. We tend to make it matter. But according to Jesus, whatever you were before he got hold of you does not matter. You are now a child of God. And Jesus does not have favorite children. He's cool like that. Sonship applies to everybody. Not those who were born into the church, not pastors. There's no hierarchy. Jesus has no favorite children. Everybody gets this. Everybody is actually something more than just Christian. Everybody who is led by the Spirit of God, everyone who has received Jesus, is also an adopted heir to the eternal kingdom. It bums me out so much to hear people devalue and disqualify themselves. And I do hear it a lot. They kind of heap these credentials on themselves. Man, I can't do that. I'm not special. Man, I'm not a pastor. I don't have super spiritual strength. I'm just a guy. I'm just a girl. But, I mean, read these. There is no more important. There is no more valuable. There is no more qualified. Whatever it is that you need Jesus to do, Jesus loves you enough to pause and give you what you need to do it. Like any good parent would for their kid, for whom in Jesus' family there are no favorites. So that's one, adoption. There is a second doctrine in this sentence, which I also love. Now, Jesus says something that we must think about. Your faith has healed you. So if you believe, God will answer your prayer. If you believe, you will be healed from all manner of afflictions immediately. This is a story about two people who have faith and how to have one like the woman who's better than Jairus, right? And if you don't see God move, then maybe you haven't had the correct faith. Maybe not. In fact, definitely not. I don't think it's that at all. And I apologize if you've heard that from somewhere. I think it's very useful to sit with these biblical examples with real people of faith. And I'll just be honest, this is why I'm doing this. This is a part that we could have glossed over. I do think it's central to the story, and here's why sometimes these things that pop up are so important to me. I want you to still love Jesus 10 years from now. I am in this for the long haul. I am less interested in making you feel good to get through tomorrow. I want you to love Jesus 10 years from now. I have some friends, I have some very good friends, who have crafted a picture of faith like the fake one I just described a minute ago. And when life did not materialize according to that picture of faith, it was deeply troubling for them. And so when that picture failed, it has rocked their faith. Some of them just simply have scars that they're learning to deal with. Some of them have really struggled to entertain the idea of faith in Jesus at this point in their life. And I pray that is in their near future. But that picture, and what I mean by that picture is the bad one. The idea that somehow the strength of your faith determines the outcome of God. Or that the sincerity and the amount of faith you have will demand some kind of response of God. I think that's an incomplete gospel at best. It's a damaging one. And I want you to have the real thing. So let's do it this way. Here's Jesus' statement. Daughter, your faith has healed you. What if it were true that the woman's faith was the acting cause of her healing? Let's just say for a moment that at literal face value what Jesus said is true. What if it's true that her faith is what caused the healing? What's the most important character in the narrative in that case? It's her faith. The hero of the story is the faith of the woman. That's the wrong hero. Someone else is in this story. The most powerful agent in this narrative is Jesus. He healed her. The other wrong answer, by the way, is Jesus' robe. No, people don't often say that, but you can say, what healed her? Well, it was his robe. Sure. So it's Jesus. That's my contention to you. Jesus is the one that healed the woman. I don't know. Do we agree? So why did he say that? Also, only 3 of you agreed. But okay, we'll keep going. So Jesus healed her. Why does Jesus say, your faith has healed you? Her faith is the instrument of her healing. But it's not the cause. So he's not lying. He is saying something true. But you have to understand, especially according to Jesus, how this works. Her faith is the instrument of her healing, but it's not the cause. Let's say you got some friends, and like every good Pacific Northwest friends, they play pickleball. So you want to go play pickleball with your friends. And you're going back and forth, and somebody hits a winner. How do you describe the event that just happened? You don't say, man, that racket made a great shot. Now, you didn't actually touch the ball, the racket did, but everybody with half a brain knows that the racket did not hit the winner. You did. It's the same way that if you're going to go skydiving, something a couple of you have, I have not yet. At one point in my life, I had great dreams of doing this. I don't know anymore. I did bungee jumping. That was good enough. But let's say, for you crazy people that actually do the skydiving, what saves you? Well, in the same way, right? The parachute opens and brings you down. That's just an instrument. It's just an instrument. In the same way, in Ephesians chapter 2, 8 through 9, that's how Paul is able to write this. For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith. All those prepositions, when they start getting piled together, are very, very confusing at times. But now that we've done the work, does not that help make this sentence make more sense? Unlike my sentence. For it is by grace you have been saved. Okay? Through faith. So, looking at Paul, what saves you? What saves you? Grace saves you through faith. Well, what part does faith have to do in this? Grace saves, faith gets me there. And specifically, this is all intentional too. Specifically, the rest of this. Not because I am anything special, but because I am dependent on the gift of God. Grace saves. Faith is what gets me to run to Jesus. Jesus saves. Faith is what gets her to run to Jesus. There are 1,000 things that could cause you to need the grace of God. 12 years of bleeding, going completely broke, the impending death of a family member, a neurodivergence, having lost your entire friend group or community. The objective of faith in the Bible is not primarily to get those things back. The object of faith is Jesus. It's to get to Jesus. Knowing I don't always know how this bridge works. I think Jesus can accomplish this thing. I think Jesus can make this happen. I think Jesus can heal. I think Jesus can save. I trust that these things are true. I don't know how he's going to do that. So what does faith do? It gets you to run and to cling to Jesus. That's how Jesus is able to say what he says to his new daughter. Your faith has healed you, not because there's some magical property in your faith, but because of your faith, here you are at my feet. You wouldn't have got here if not for faith. Now here you are, holding on to my robe. It is because of your faith that you are healed. Speaking of which, here comes Jairus. Forgot all about that guy. Here comes Jairus. Bad news. His daughter is dead. But how's this for a rebuke? Don't bother the teacher anymore. Same sentence. Your daughter is dead. Leave that guy alone. Overhearing this, there's a fun one. Your Bible may have a footnote on verse 36. Mine does. But you might have a little letter with a footnote. It's an interesting translation, overhearing what they said. There's another way you could translate that, which is ignoring. So Jesus heard but did not care. Jesus heard and ignored what they said. And so Jesus told him, Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe. And that made me pause. Don't be afraid. Shouldn't it be, don't be sad? What do these two have anything to do with each other? Jairus' daughter is dead. And Jesus says, don't be afraid. What is the deal? I don't know if any of you have ever said that to console somebody in a loss. Don't be afraid. Odd. What's the deal? One of the numbers that I love, 40 times in the New Testament, 40 times in the NIV, either God or an angel says, do not be afraid. Every time in the New Testament, do not be afraid comes from God or an angel. It's from heaven to earth. Don't be afraid. And so in saying, don't be afraid, is Jesus saying fear and faith don't coexist? I found that on the internet this week. I would say sort of, but it's way deeper than just that on an Instagram post, I think. Especially because in almost every Narnia story, and I'll just use this again as a plug. If you have never read the Chronicles of Narnia, I would wholeheartedly recommend them to you for 3 reasons. 1, they're phenomenal stories. 2, they're unbelievable layers of theology. And 3, they will help you understand me better, because I will refer to them from time to time. So you can be like, hey, I know what he's talking about. In almost every Narnia story, C.S. Lewis suggests that courage or faith is not the absence of fear, but it is acting despite it. And in fact, the way that he phrases it one time is, courage is not the absence of fear, but the judgment that something else is more important than fear. I like that. Because, especially as there's stories relating to kids as the main heroes, there's a really cool dynamic at play of when people are afraid and when they have faith to move forward anyway. And so Jairus has been presented with a situation that humanly we all say this is impossible. And now Jesus says, don't be afraid. The woman was afraid, very much. We even got that in verse 33. She came with fear and trembling and told him the whole truth. She was afraid, but her faith was greater because her view of Jesus was greater. It's not just some mustering up of an internal strength. It's not. That's why these messages in the Bible, and therefore the sermons, are never just have more faith. No, it's her view of Jesus was so much greater than her problem, that her faith compelled her to move towards him. Her fear was breaking through the barrier to being vulnerable, exposing that level of shame in front of hundreds of people. Real life, not isolated life, was there, but it was scary, but Jesus was worth it. And I would suggest that faith necessarily contains some risk. It's impossible to believe in Jesus and all that he has claimed and all that he has said he may ask you to do and not be a little afraid. So to Jairus, what Jesus is saying, don't throw up your hands because the situation looks hopeless. You came to me to do the impossible. You came here. Do you still believe that I am that person? Do you still believe that I can do those types of things, though your world has changed? You came to me to help me. You came to me to help your daughter cheat death. Will you take me anyway? And so he goes. I don't have that on screen, but we'll go to verse 37. So Jesus goes. Verse 37, he did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." Jesus does this on purpose. This is 3 times he has asked a question that if you're only human, you think he's stupid. But Jesus knows more than us. She is not dead, but asleep. It's not only a stupid thing to say, it's very offensive. Like, we know what death looks like. And this has been minutes. This is very raw, very real. So he says that. But Jesus is not limited by our emotional attachment to one life. He gets to see past that. And so he is able to say things like this. And we get the gift of Jesus' vocabulary that death for the Christian is not forever. In fact, sleeping becomes the predominant term that the church uses. That's what this was. It was so impressive, so important to the early church. This was how they started to talk about death. Falling asleep, falling asleep, falling asleep. In fact, that is the way that they talk about death for the rest of the Bible. And so Jesus introduces that. Great, cool, but still, why would Jesus say that here? Your child is not dead, but asleep. I'll tell you what it's not. The point is not that Jesus brings everyone back to life. Not the physical body in the current lifespan. There are a lot of people that Jesus interacts with. Not a lot of them get to come back to life. Other people died while Jesus was alive. He didn't raise all of them. So the point is not that Jesus brings everyone back to life. He doesn't bring everyone back to life. Also, she dies again later. The people that get raised to life in the New Testament all have the very bizarre shared experience of dying a second time. So the point is to show that Jesus can bring resurrection. And in that, Jesus has this very curious way of giving you what you really need. Oftentimes, he knows even better what you need than you do. Jairus came hoping that Jesus would prevent death. But what he and the whole town got to learn was that Jesus has authority over death. In such a way that it even impacts his vocabulary. This is the first person Jesus brought back to life in his ministry. If she had not died, this town, and word spread, would not know that Jesus has authority to bring life from death. And I wonder similarly, how many people have had to have a part of their life die before coming to realize that Jesus can save them. It's actually pretty typical. With the woman, she came hoping for healing. What the entire town learned was that Jesus adopts and is able to bring people into true community. See, the result was tailored to their reality, just like it is so much for you and me. I imagine that the parents would have preferred their daughter not to die in the first place. I imagine that the woman would have preferred to touch Jesus' robe, be healed, and then make a quiet getaway. Or better yet, get healed 11 years ago. What took so long? Jesus? But faith led them to Jesus. Faith was powerful because it got them to grab hold of Jesus. And they received far more than what they initially asked for. Now here's the very last point in the last two verses here. Verse 41, Jesus took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. That's all it takes for Jesus to conquer death. Wake up. Immediately the little girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. The woman had been bleeding for 12 years. This is to say that an entire lifetime of suffering, Jesus is able to overcome in an instant. 2 lifetimes of suffering, Jesus can overcome in an instant. And then, and at this they were completely astonished. First time someone's reacted normally in this passage. And then he gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this. That we're not going to do a lot with. That's Jesus' MO in Israel. Jesus wants to reveal Jesus on Jesus' timeline. He is constantly telling people, let me be Messiah. We'll come to that another time though, because I want to talk about this. And he told them to give her something to eat. I thought about this a lot. She just came back from the dead, and Jesus tells the parents to give her food for a couple reasons. One, they were astonished, so there's a chance when you're whooping it up about somebody coming back to life, you forget about lunch. Okay, so Jesus cares. That is very nice. I love that about Jesus. I think there's something else here, though. That's where some of the commentaries left it short. But let me suggest this. You and I don't live in 365 miracles a year world. We don't. We don't live in the world of a miracle a day. 365 times Jesus is raising people from the dead and healing things instantaneously. Well, no. This was 12 years. They got one apiece. They got one that we get recorded. And after miracle, have some food. After the miracle, guess what you get? Jesus returns you to normal life. Now, for both of them, that's an incredible, an unbelievable blessing. She, in the first, had never experienced normal life. That's what she got given. In the second, she experienced death. And what she was given was normal life. And for them in that moment, that's an unbelievable gift. But we are greedy. We are so greedy. And 12 years of normal life sometimes can feel like, where is these miracles, man? Jesus. But it's true. It's the pattern of Jesus that he does amazing things. And he also returns us to normal life. And that doesn't mean he's gone. That doesn't mean he's left. That's where you belong, knowing what you know. Having been transformed the way that only Jesus can, he sends you back into life. with regeneration, with a new story, and maybe for the first time in your life, normal life. So I would encourage, instead of walking out of here and your prayer being, give me more faith, give me stronger faith, give me better faith, my prayer is that we would rightly understand that faith gets us to Jesus. And so that my approach would just be, God, help me get to you. Whether it's because I need a miracle or whether it's because normal life is also at times hard and disappointing life, God, give me the strength to run and to cling to you. And then you will do what you will do. Maybe he will lead you through a spectacular miracle. Maybe he will give you what you didn't know you didn't have. But let's pray for that together. God, even as you are conqueror, you are adopter. Thank you for defeating all the obstacles in our life, but also thank you for drawing us near. Would you help us to fall at your feet? God, let us just experience being your sons and daughters in a special way this Christmas, that we would receive the gift of adoption, that we would rightly understand the working of faith, that we would lay ourselves at your feet for whatever it is that you're about to do in our life, that our priority would be you. In your precious name we pray. Amen.